Most of us could quote much of the 23rd Psalm, such as, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Did you get that? He restoreth my soul. Now the word for soul in the Scriptures in the New Testament is psyches. Psyche, which we get the word psychology from. God is a great psychologist. There is a biblical psychology. Now, if you read my book, in a portion where I talk about the psychological Trojan horse, you would get the idea, perhaps, that I think all psychology is a lot of baloney. Well, that's not quite right. Only about 96% of it is. Now, I'd like to talk to you about some biblical psychology, which is a part of the moral government of God teaching. Now, my friends, the Quakers in the 18th century founded some homes to take care of people who had mental problems. And they kept very good records, but they never treated anyone who had mental problems as if they were sick. You get that? Never treated them as if they were sick. They said they had problems in living. You get that? There's a difference now. And so they saw that they needed, many times, rest. Just plain rest. Like, for instance, depression. The biggest cure for depression is rest. Now let me give you a simple example of that. If you recall, when Elijah was on Mount Carmel, he was battling these 400 false priests. He really went through a great emotional time up there. They prayed all morning, and then he prayed in the afternoon, but he said, well, my God's able. He just had them pour water on the sacrifice, didn't he? He'd make it tougher on the Lord, right? Or am I quoting you Shakespeare? He made it tougher on the Lord, and the Lord came down, and the water was nothing to it. He looked that up, and the sacrifice became burnt very quickly, and then he destroyed these 400 false prophets. That's quite a man, Elijah. But a week later, he's in depression. And he's afraid of a woman, Jezebel. He's scared. Now here he is just annihilated and demolished 400 men, and he's afraid of a woman now. He's really down in the dumps so far, he could have found you an old tire. Well, now, let's look into the reason for that. All of us have an emotional bank, my friends. We have so much emotion that we're capable of. When that emotional bank gets depleted, you'll go into depression. Now, we should never treat people that are in depression as they're there because of sin. It can be on account of sin, but it can be they've just plain worked themselves so much. I remember when I was in a citywide crusade, and we really had revival come to this town. It was a mighty revival. I prayed with so many people over a 2-week period of time, and I wept with so many, I became dehydrated. Dehydrated. There was nothing more. You couldn't get another tear out of me. So what did I do? I knew then what I'm telling you now, so I got my wife and kiddies, and we went to Florida, down to visit her folks, and I just rested. I just rested. I knew. See, if you know how you're put together, you can do a lot about it. So what did God do with Elijah? First thing in depression, you got to change the scenery. And he took him apart and he rested to get that emotional bank filled back up. This is why Jesus says, come apart and rest a while. I admit I'm perhaps the poorest at this. But there's your answers to depression. Change the scenery and get some rest. So you wouldn't certainly say that Elijah was in depression because of sin. Of course not. Now, when the Quakers had their mental institutions running on the basis of they were not sick, but they had problems in living, within a year's time, 90% of the people that would come to this mental home, 90% would be cured and leave there in less than a year. But when Freudian psychology came on the scene and said that they were not problems in living, but they were sick, within 1 year's time, the figures turned 180 degrees opposite. Otherwise, within 1 year, 90% are still there. You see, if you're sick, you can't help it. Is that right? Now, my dear friends, I want you to learn the difference between a sickness and a weakness. I believe mental problems are weaknesses, not sicknesses, weaknesses. I do not believe that alcoholism is a disease. I went to school with one of the, and I knew him very personally, one of the greatest psychologists of our day, and he used to say to me, Harry, if we keep on saying that alcoholism is a disease, these drunks are sick, he said, they're going to breed like rabbits. I asked you, have they? They sure have. He said, they're not sick, that's an outward symptom of an inner need of the heart not being met. Get that? An outward symptom of the inner need of the heart not being met. He says it is a weakness, not a sickness. Now, my dear friends, let me explain to you the difference between a weakness and a sickness. I used to play baseball. I could throw a ball from here to that wall over there. Not very many people want to catch it because I'd throw it so hard. But today I couldn't even throw a ball that far. Why? Well, after 30 years of not throwing anything other than just to my daughter's little play and catch, what few muscles I have ever had have disappeared. They really have. They've disappeared. Now, I used to could throw a football, even in a low room like this, and hit that wall. But I couldn't do it. I'd be lucky now if I could hit that rafter right there. Now, why? My arm is weak compared to what it was then. Now, if I strengthen this, and if I take on the right kind of food, and I get the right kind of rest, and I do the right kind of exercising, I could get it back. Maybe I'd never again throw a baseball like I would, but I'd get it to a place where it wouldn't be weak, couldn't I? By strengthening it. Now, mental problems can be the same way. They're weaknesses. The first weakness is they don't know how they're put together by God. They don't know how they operate. I remember when 3 men were trying to drive me crazy. And I believe it's possible to drive a person crazy. But I knew enough psychology, enough theology, and I just hung on to the Lord, and I said, they can't do it to me, Lord. They can't do it to me. And they didn't. But I knew what they were doing. And by the way, I never fought them back, and 2 of those are 2 of my best friends today. See, it always takes 2 to tango, it takes 2 to fight, doesn't it? But these kind of things we're talking about now are important. Now, a weakness. If you can take that particular member, whatever it is, even though it's a whole person, you take that person and make it, strengthen it so it can cope with its existing and surrounding stresses, it is not weak. If it is sick, a sickness, get this, dear friends, always has a causative agent. If you have smallpox, that's because you have a virus. Now, if you're in bed with smallpox, I can come to see you and I can lecture to you 3 hours a day for 3 weeks on why you shouldn't have smallpox. But is that going to change anything? Now watch. If I come and lecture to you on why you shouldn't have smallpox, or why you shouldn't have appendicitis and you're all bent over, is all my jawbone going to change anything? In a sickness? Now really, am I going to reason you out of a sickness? If it's really sick? All right then, if mental problems are sicknesses, why talk about them at $70 an hour? You get what I'm saying? I hope that has dawned on you right real quick. A sickness always has a dysfunction, a malfunction. Something's not working right in the body. That is physical, not moral. Not moral. Now, it may have had a origin in immorality. That's true, because I do believe there's such thing as psychosomatic diseases. That if you think wrong and you act wrong, pretty soon you're going to begin to feel wrong. And you're going to be wrong. Now, let me show you what I mean a little bit plainer. In a sickness. You can have a chemical imbalance, and you can act strangely, see certain aberrations in your life in a mental sense of the word. When you get old, and our arteries don't work like this to help push enough blood up to our brain, the brain doesn't get enough oxygen, so therefore we begin to act senile. Now, my friends, you see on the board over here, I'd call that organogenic. But if you're that way, going to a shrink and paying him $70 an hour isn't going to help anything, is it? You see what I'm saying? Did you know that 96% of the people today in state mental institutions are not sick? Mm-hmm. They're not sick. Now, if you went to the great William Glasser of our day, who wrote the book, and you should get a hold of it, called Reality Therapy. It's out now in a paperback, sells for $2.50. Reality Therapy. If you brought a young person to him, a son or daughter or some person, you even went to him yourself and you said, I'm mentally ill, or if you brought one that was acting strangely and you said, no, he or she is mentally ill, he'd say, no, she's not sick. She's not mentally ill. She's crazy. Now, he differentiates between being sick and crazy. Now, here's the reason he says she's crazy. She's doing crazy things. She's doing crazy things. By the way, why do you call a man a horse thief? Yeah, why do you call him a wife beater? Why do you think you ought to call him crazy? They're doing crazy things. That's right. You call those aberrations. By the way, why do you think you ought to call him a sinner?
Because he sinned.
Oh, yes, but Calvinism says, no, you don't. You're not a sinner because you sin, but you sin because you're a sinner. Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that ridiculous? You're a sinner because you sin. If you sin because you're born a sinner, then you had funny justice down here in Texas when you hung a horse thief, because you shouldn't hang a horse thief because he's born a horse thief. That's funny justice, isn't it? But a man's a horse thief because he steals horses. You can't be born a horse thief no more than you're born a sinner. What light does a baby have to sin against? None. None. He doesn't know right from wrong. A lot of the young kids that they're saying this to, they don't even know puberty from Pennsylvania. Imagine the Quakers turned like that 180 degrees and never began to wonder why. Now, Mr. Glasser says, and by the way, this is good moral government teaching. He has stumbled upon moral government, is what he has, and he's not even a Christian. There are 3 R's to mental health. 3 R's. First, put this one down. Reality. Reality. That's facing the situations of life and yourself as you really are. If you want to define reality, reality are the situations of life as they really are. And if you want to define truth, truth is simply the reality of any given situation. But you can't define truth if you don't know what reality is. And by the way, the biggest problem God has with man is to get man to face reality. That's the biggest problem you're going to have when you leave here to go out and try to win souls. Because the average person thinks he's too good to go to hell and not quite good enough to go to heaven. But Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was the Supreme Court Justice back when it took character, he said, you're 4 people. You ought to write these down. 4 people. There's a person you think you are. Then there's the person that people think you are. First, the person you think you are. Then there's a person that you think people think you are. Then there's the person, third, that the people really think you are. You know, what you think people think you are and what they think you are may be poles apart. What you think people think you are and what they really think may be poles apart. Now, fourth. Wait, was that too fast? All right, first, there's a person you think you are. Then, second, there's a person you think people think you are. Third, there's the person that the other people really think you are. You see, what you think they think you are and what they think you are. Maybe poles apart. You get that? Fourth, then there's a person that God really knows us to be. And when you see that, you say, Paul, move over, here comes another chief. Because Paul said, of sinners, I'm what? Chief. See, in God's army, they're all chiefs, no Indians. No people in God's army who think they're too good to go to hell, not quite good enough to go to heaven. Nobody ever gets saved, my dear friends, by trying Jesus. You get saved by seeing that you're a sinner, lost and doomed and hell-bound and hell-deserving and thoroughly persuaded that Jesus died for you. Thoroughly persuaded. None of this trying Jesus won't work. Won't work and doesn't work. So, to get man to face reality is the first problem. To get us to face ourselves. But also, dear friends, to face the situations of life. Most of us are either living in the future or in the past. Is that right? What does God want us to do? Live in the now, right today, because now is the day of salvation. You either got it today or you don't have it. You're either going to have it in this life or you won't have it in the future. So to get us to face ourselves and the situations of life. Now you got to get that, the situations of life. If you're a person that can't read very well, admit it and go get some reading lessons. If you're a person that can't think very well, go sit down with somebody who will help you to teach you how to think. Only admit it. If you're a dummy, don't remain a dummy. That's all. It's no sin to be a dummy. It's a sin to remain a dummy. Now let me tell you the difference between engineers and scientists. Engineers, there's so much in engineering. But many of us, and I can remember when I had this problem too, we'd say, oh boy, there's so much in engineering. Now, this guy may think I don't know what I should know, and I don't know it all, but if I open my mouth, I remove all of his doubt. So, what do? We keep still, and we act like we know it all. And we don't ask questions. Now, a scientist says, you ought to write this down. It is better to look ignorant than to remain ignorant. Now tell me, explain that statement to me. It's better to look ignorant than to remain ignorant.
Better to have somebody explain it to you than sit there and not know.
Well, it's better to ask and admit you don't know, right? God resisteth the proud. The proud's the guy to have you think he knows when he doesn't. God resists that kind. If you don't know, go ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. By the way, if you'd gone through Chicago University in 1908 and got all the education they had there for you, it'd taken you 508 years. So some of us go through in 4 years, think we got it all. And by the way, now it'd be up around 8,000 years take you to get it all. So some of us go and get a little, and we think we got a lot, huh? Remember what I said to you? True education is changing from the state of unconscious ignorance to what?
Conscious ignorance.
Conscious ignorance. So reality, face the situations of life. Face ourselves as we really are. All right? Second, R is responsibility. Now, didn't we see in moral government the responsibilities have sanctions connected with them? Didn't we? Penalties and rewards. If you fulfill your responsibilities, you get the rewards. If you don't, you get the penalties. And every one of us have responsibilities in this life. So they're not optional, my dear friends. Third, right. R for right. 3 R's. The mental health. Right. You do what's right, and you'll be what? You'll be right. You do what's righteous, you'll be righteous. That's all. If you're not doing what's righteous, you're not righteous. Don't ever think Jesus Christ obeyed the law for you. No, he didn't. He obeyed the law for himself. Because Jesus became a child of the law when he was 12 years of age. And he didn't do anything that was left over to put down to your credit in a way of an imputed righteousness that is not imparted. Jesus had to obey the law for himself, and the law required Jesus to love God with all of his heart. Now, you cannot love God more than with all your heart. So he could not do more than was required, so something could be left over for you and me. Oh, get that straight. But a lot of people have taught, God looks down at me and he doesn't see me in my sin. He sees Jesus in the blood of Christ. Oh, that's a terrible teaching. It's terrible teaching. Millions of people going to hell today on that kind of teaching. God cannot look down at you and see anything other than reality. And God cannot look at you and be honest and say, if you're sick, you're well. Is any surgeon who sees you sick going to call you well if he's honest? And by the way, if you're sick, admit you're sick. Don't go along with this old foolishness and don't confess it. Now, that's for people who do not know theology, do not know how to teach. Jesus said, them that are sick have need of a physician. Now, you got to admit you're sick to use a physician. Is that right? Let's face reality. Face the situations of life as they really are. This don't confess it stuff is ridiculous. That's what we're now calling people who believe that. They're charismatic Christian scientists. Yeah, charismatic Christian scientists, because Christian scientists won't face reality. Even when somebody dies, he didn't die, he just passed away. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of the old story, you know, about the rabbi and the priest and the Christian Scientist practitioner that wound up down in Hades. Not much difference, by the way. And then one of them says, aren't you a priest? Yeah. Aren't you a rabbi? Yeah. Aren't you a practitioner, a reader? Yeah. Well, they said to the priest, what are you doing here? Oh, he said, I guess it was all those steaks I ate on Friday. Well, they looked at the rabbi and said, what are you doing here? Well, he said, I guess it's all those barbecued ribs. I just like pork. They looked at the practitioner, the Christian Scientist, and said, what are you doing here? He said, oh, I'm not here. Oh, I'm not here. Even during the last, whatever you call that big deal they had over in Russia, or in Rome here about 10 years ago, and they had all the various ecumeniacs in there, if you remember. And they have all of them sitting there. And one of them stood up in the balcony and he said, he stood up and they acknowledged him. What can we do for you? He said, is there a Christian Scientist in the house? One stood up in the ground floor. He said, I am. Why? He said, could I exchange seats with you? I'm sitting in a draft. Did you get it? Well, one would face reality and the other one wouldn't. See, this is the hardest thing for people to get people to do, is face the situations of life as they really are. Now then, if you brought your son or daughter, like a woman brought her daughter to me one time, several hundred miles, and she getting off of trains and planes carrying a stuffed toy this big. Now that's what you call an aberration, my friend. Teenage girl in her late teens, you know, walking around with stuffed toys. It's big. She wouldn't go anywhere without stuffed toys. I'd like to walk around with her. So her mother brought her all the way to Rockford, Illinois for me to talk to her. Now, if you said to Mr. Glasser, if you said to me, my daughter's mentally ill, I'd say, no, she isn't. She's crazy. She's not mentally ill, she's crazy. Now, why is she crazy? Because she's doing crazy things. Ah, but why is she doing crazy things? Now, here's where the gospel comes in. You want to get this down. The reason people do crazy things are this. We all have two basic needs that God designed into our life. And if we don't get those two basic needs fulfilled in a normal, natural way, we go out and fulfill them in an abnormal, unnatural way. What are those two basic needs? First, to love. To love. Most people know nothing about love. They think it's all hugging and kissing. To love. Brother Tony's taught you it's willing the highest good of the other brother. Not only willing, it's doing it. Willing. You can't really will it without doing it, you know. So, when you love your fellow man, you fulfill a need in your life. But wait a minute, God has also designed us so we need love. So the two basic needs in man are to love and to be loved. So when we love our fellow creature, we're fulfilling a need in his life, but who else are we fulfilling a need in our? Now, is it any wonder God demands we love one another? Is that being hard? Is that being oppressive? Is that being burdensome? Why, no, it's no more burdensome when we design an automobile and we say if you want to go 100 miles, you better put some gas in it. Because it runs on gas. Man runs on love. And if you don't love, you're not going to be normal. You're not going to be natural. Now, if you do what's right, you be right. It's right to love, isn't it? Now then, Mr. Glasser was given a ward in a Veterans Administration hospital in Los Angeles. Had 200 men, war veterans, that averaged 15 years in this mental ward. He went in there, and by the way, ordinarily one a year would leave as cured by the Freudian approach. One, that's all. He went in there and he taught them what I've just taught you, the 3 R's. Reality, responsibility, and right. And by the way, 74 left the first year. 74, and only 4 of those ever returned. Only 4. Boston Psychiatric Hospital took 100 college kids that didn't average over 2 years of college. Get this. I want to weep when I tell you this, because this should have been done by Christian kids in the Boston area. No, they're too busy trying to go to heaven. Took 100 Christian kids, taught them about 3 sessions like I've given you, only there's a little more. Give each one of these 100 college kids 2 or 3, only 2 or 3 patients in a Boston Psychiatric Hospital. Went in first, showed them they loved them, spent some time with them, got them to write to their folks, got them to face reality, got them to get up and put clean clothes on, wash their face, comb their hair, went downtown to do shopping, went to see them 2 and 3 and 4 times a week. Showed them just what we're talking about here, and would you believe it? So many of them left that mental institution, never returned. You can go to Boston Psychiatric Hospital now, and you can find whole wards there with all the beds folded up and pushed back in the corner. By just teaching what we're talking here. But go in there and show them you love them. Go in and show them you love them. Spend some real time with them. Help them. Shouldn't this be done by God's people? See, this is what we need to be teaching our kids in our churches, not to take them to snow camps and this camp and that camp, and you've just made them more selfish. That's all you've done. You haven't helped them to go on to be saints of God and to live sacrificial lives to get out and serve God. You're hurting them when you do that. I got money, send my own kids to camp. I don't need a church to do it. And you're not helping kids when you do that, but if you get them out to do what I was just talking about, get them out to serve their fellow man. Go out there to show them that you love them. Not out there to get something out of them, you get that? But out there to do something for them. Love as still as you got out there in your gate, the greatest force in the world. Now down in Milledgeville, Georgia, one of the largest, get this, one of the largest mental institutions in the world. They had large, great dormitories with men just sitting there like this. You could come up to them, they'd never even see your hand. In there vegetating, they wouldn't even take the trouble to go to the toilet. Stench is terrible. Fella came in there, said, okay, boys, no more of this. Tomorrow morning, if you want breakfast, you're going to get in that line over there by 7 o'clock or you don't get any breakfast. And you're going to have 25 cents in wooden nickels. If you don't have 25 cents in wooden nickels, you don't get any breakfast. Now here's the way you get a wooden nickel. You shave. You put on clean clothes. You clean up your room. You get in that line over there on time. He gave them 5 things to do. So what was they doing? They were facing reality, right? They got a responsibility to put clean clothes on. They got a responsibility to shave. They got a responsibility to look decent. And by the way, Emptied whole wards. And by the way, every meal was like this. You had to have 25 cents in wooden nickels, or you didn't get a meal. They'd only had one man ever miss 2 meals. The whole place began to empty because they're facing reality. Somebody's leaning on them to make them assume and fulfill their responsibilities and to do what is right. But you know, one fellow in there almost messed up the whole deal. He got broom handles and began sawing them off, counterfeiting wooden nickels. I ask you, was he sick? No. Well, that's what you'd have called him. That's why you put him in there. He's sick. He's lazy. That's what he is, right? He's just lazy. Yeah, he almost messed up the whole deal. I was lecturing at Purdue University 10 years ago, and I had a sister in Logansport State Hospital. That's called Longcliffe. It's a mental place. She had gone there voluntarily and committed herself. I heard about it. I finished lecturing one morning at Purdue University about 11:30, and I drove 50 miles to this place. And after about half an hour, I finally found my sister, and she just sitting there looking off into nowhere. Right away, she recognized me. She stood up, and we hugged and kissed. And I took her to get something to eat, and I spent the whole afternoon with her, and I was teaching her just what I'm teaching you. And then I gave her a book, Reality Therapy. Get this, Reality Therapy, which is where I've taken what I'm talking to you about, by William Glasser. See, the trouble is, though, it doesn't know how to get guilt resolved. He's not a Christian. But he sure can get him out of the funny farm. So I sat there and I explained these things to her, and I left the book. I gave her $20 in cash, just to be kind to her, and I know they can use it in there. I said, now, Mary, I'd like for you to read this book, and would you send me the outline of this book? She's a very intelligent woman. She said, sure, Harry. And so we hugged and kissed and told each other how much we loved each other. I want to tell you, her letter almost beat me back to where I live. In less than a week, she went, she said, I want a sanity test. I want a sanity test. They gave her a sanity test, they turned her loose, and that woman lived 9 years after that with no mental problems whatsoever. Well, first thing she needed was me to show her I loved her, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Now think of all the people around here that need us to show them that we love them. Boy, you talk about agape force, how would that be? You know, you could take a room twice this size with this many people in it. If we taught them right, we could empty. We could just empty, because 96% of the people in mental institutions, according to Dr. Torrey, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, he says they're not sick. Now, let me show you why some others are in there. Some of these young people, when their folks get old and they come to be a little burdensome, well, they haven't committed to mental institution. That's terrible. That's a sin. I took care of my precious mother the last 14 years she lived. I want to tell you something. It's one of the greatest privileges God ever gave a man. I took care of my mom and daddy and my dear wife. What a pleasure that was. I can look back on that. And by the way, let me show some of you, if you ever really get out and really preach and really go on the way you should, you're going to be just like it was during the war, when many times in battle fatigue, a guy would lay there and he couldn't go to sleep. Let me show you a sure way to go to sleep. Just think back on the very, very pleasant things in your Christian life that have happened. Well, now, some of you, that wouldn't take you over a minute. Even go on back and think about when you were a kid and all those things you did with mom and daddy. And think about the pleasant things that you did with mom and daddy. And if you put your mind on those things, and these things in where you've served the Lord not to get anything, put your mind on those, and on Him, you'll go to sleep. That's how we teach men with battle fatigue to get to sleep. But some of you, it wouldn't take you very long to run through the gamut of that, would it? See, we need to know something about this mind. He said, He restoreth my soul. How does He do it? When we get our mind in tune with His mind. When we love what He loves. When we hate what he hates. When we're doing what he would be doing if he were here. Oh, now then there begins a restoring of the soul. Now, my friends, our company has a shrink. You say, Harry, you got a psychologist? Yeah. I'm gone a lot. I mean, when I was the chief executive officer, I was gone. I spent about half my time preaching. The way to tell if you're a good executive is, does a place run better when you're gone than when you're there? It's kind of hard on your ego, but that's the way a good executive is. He doesn't have to be around dotting all the T's and everybody asking him all these questions. If you came to me with a lot of these things that some people do, why, I'd say, look, don't bother me with that. You ought to be able to figure that out yourself. Either that or you're not smart enough to work here is what I would tell him. Now, I'm having lunch one day with our shrink. And I was telling him he had studied under the great Dr. Maurer who wrote Reality Therapy, and I was telling him that I didn't agree with his book. Well, he said, Harry, I'm glad to hear you say it because I don't agree with him either. See, Maurer says that all mental problems are caused by man's own sin. But yet psychiatrists and psychologists never talk about sin, do they? I said to him, I don't believe that. I said, I believe some of it is. But I said, some mental problems are organogenic. This can be a chemical imbalance. This can be you get hit in the head with a ball bat. See, some organ's not right. Chemical imbalance, organogenic. Now, I put M in there, friends, because I'm not going to argue with her as to whether it's a sickness or it is a weakness. But I'm going to show you where mental problems come from. Because we've got to help people in this world. That's a part of being a force for God. All right, our sin. Let me show you how the human mind is. Let's say you brought up here a brand new TV set with a good, very good audio and visual reception. Now then, you've got it on, and if you come up to that thing 10 times a day, and you do this, right on the side, that picture will go like that. You do that 10 times a day, and after about the 8th time, you got to do this, don't you? But I'll tell you what, you keep on doing that 10 times a day, and I mean whacking it hard on the side, not on the tube, just on the side. Give her a real bang. I'm going to tell you something. In a year's time, you can do all of that you want, and you're not going to straighten it out. Now, could you tell me why that TV set's sound begins to go and why the picture is distorted? Can you tell me? Well, someone said abuse. What else? All right, someone else. None of you got it yet. Yeah, but you can smack a safe. It wasn't designed to be treated like that, was it? What was you going to say? That's right. You know anything more sensitive in the human mind? The psalmist says we're wonderfully and fearfully what? Made. There's nothing in this world any more delicate than the human mind. And I'm going to tell you, every time you go out and commit a sin like that, you're like a guy comes up and whacks his TV set right on the side. Right on the side. And don't ever think that there aren't consequences to it. There aren't consequences to it. You bet your life. Man reaps what he sows. But Maurer says all this. And I said, no, Dr. Bill. There's this too. Sin's against us. And he said, oh, Brother Harry, he said, you sure have hit something here. He said, I agree with you 100%. But he said, you well know, I'm also a consulting psychologist to the Sterling Rock Falls school system. And he said, we had a little girl down there, a honey of a girl, 10 years of age. She wouldn't come to school because she had school phobia. I said, well, I had that. Every spring. He said, oh, no, she was really, if you made her go to school, she became a stark, raving, screaming little psychotic maniac. You pick her up to take her, she'd scream and scratch and claw you like a wildcat. She wouldn't go to school. So one day, he said, I sent a couple of cops down there, and I said, now you bring her, even if you got to carry her against her will. So here they came with her, and she's scratching and fighting them every step of the way. 10 years of age. Set her down. I said, no, honey, nobody's going to hurt you. He said, now go get her parents. So in 15 minutes here they came with the mother. He said, where's her dad? Well, he wouldn't come. He said, you go get him and you tell him if he doesn't come, I'll sign a warrant for his arrest. So in about 15 minutes here he came like a Hessian volunteer. If you know your history, if you don't know what a Hessian is and how they got him, you need to go back and study your history. Here he came. He sat down grumpily. Now he said to this precious girl, he said, now honey, what is it you're afraid of here? You afraid the building's going to fall on you? Oh no, it's a nice new school building. You afraid of the teacher? Oh no, she's wonderful. Have the pupils mistreated you? The other students? Oh no, they're wonderful, these kids. Well, he said, honey, what are you afraid of here? She said, him. She pointed at her dad. Why are you afraid of him? In the past year, he'd come one day when her mother was gone, took her out of school, took her home and raped her. So she knew when she was at school, she is away from her mother's protective custody. You see that? Away from her protective custody, and that just triggered her poor little brain. She's gone. She's gone. My dear friends, you see now what I mean by sins against us? Sins against us? My dear friends, you see somebody having mental problems, you just go up and you show them real love. Real love. You notice a difference that begins to take place in them. It'll be better than any medicine the doctor can give them. I'm sitting there talking to Doc, and I said, Doc, I do not believe it's a disease. He said, I don't either, Harry. Let me give you proof. He said, when I was doing my internship at Elgin State Hospital, which is about 43 miles from where I live, he said, I had almost 200 men in one ward, and he said you could go in there and you could walk in front of them and you do anything to them, they wouldn't even know you were there. They're out in bye-bye land. Fantasy land. Escaping reality. He said, there they sat, just vegetate. He said, we'd ring the fire bell. They'd all jump up and run out the door. They'd all jump up and run out the door. He said, and they'd run out there and they'd look around, well, where's the fire? Well, there's no fence. They didn't keep on going. If you keep on going, you got to face what? Reality. Yeah, you got to face reality. He said, so they'd turn right around and line up in front of the door, just like a corporal's guard. Like the National Guard, they're in lines of 4. And one back in. He said, so then when they'd go back in, they'd go strolling down the hall. Here's a Coke machine. There's 30 cents then for a Coke. Package of cigarettes, 40. Get a ham sandwich for 65. He said they put the correct change in every one of them. And he says, you going to tell me they're sick? He said, not me. I never believed that. They were in there escaping responsibility, escaping reality. You get it now? So he said, now let's analyze it. When that fire bell went off, their motive to live was greater than their motive to what? To escape reality. You're going to tell me they're sick? If you won't get me to agree. Had a man, I'm in a meeting. My secretary came in, slipped a note on her, this division head, he was in charge of our international. Said, he won't be in anymore, Harry. He's having himself committed to Elgin State Hospital this afternoon. I got up and left the meeting. I said to my secretary, call him, ask him, please don't go anywhere till he comes in and talks to me. So about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he came in and talked to me. Sit down, and I said to him, I said, well, my friend, if you go to Elgin, you're going to escape reality. It's true. Are people writing you about your bills? He said, yep. I said, well, there's one thing you got to face. You got a champagne taste and a Coca-Cola effort. You get that? Now, I said, is your mother-in-law writing you? He said, yep. Well, I said, let me tell you what, tell that mother-in-law of yours. Tell her if she doesn't like the way that you're providing for her darling little daughter, she can just peel off a couple $1,000 a month and you'll do it. Either that or keep her mouth shut. Keep her mouth shut. And I said, you got to be a man, you got to run your own house. And I knew that his mother-in-law really had a saddle on him. She was riding him. Then I said, Mike, do you want to tell me about the sin in your life? He looked at me and said, how'd you know? How'd you know? I said, well, I know how it affects people. I know how it affects people. getting too heavy a load, isn't it? He said, yep. So I taught him these 3 R's. I said, now, Mike, you can go hide in that funny farm, but I think you're a pretty good guy. I believe you'd pay your bills if you had the money, wouldn't you? He said, yes. I said, well, if you go hide in there 3 years, your bills are going to be 21% bigger than they are now, even if they're not compounded. So is that going to get the bills off your hands? He said, no. I said, you got 4 boys, haven't you? He said, yes. I said, your wife can be a wonderful mother, but she can't even be a poor father. They need you. There's certain attributes you'll get from you they can't get from her. And if you want to come back 10 years later and have 4 pansies, guys who walk around like this, you want to have 4 pansies, you just go in there and hide from your responsibility to be a real man in front of those boys so they get some real mannish traits and attributes from you. See what happens. I said, is that what you want your sons to be? He said, I should say not. Boy, I'm telling you, we kept on going, and he jumped up. He said, you're not going to have any more trouble from me, Harry. And he went out there, out of my office, he went back. He did a terrific job for us the next 2 years, and let me tell you, he resigned and became a college professor in our town, was that for 10 years. Never went to see a shrink again. I just got him to face reality, face responsibility. I got him to do what's right. I got him to turn from his sin. See that? This is what we need to do. Why don't we have tens of thousands of Christians that can do this in our day? That care enough. That care enough. That care enough. I'll have 3 to 4 people come to me every week. It's got these kind of problems. If you ever hear me get put in jail, it's for being put in jail for practicing as a psychiatrist without a license. But the only difference is I don't take any money for it. If you learn what I'm talking to you about and you really study after I leave, dear friends, you're not going to have to go around this world grabbing people by the ear to talk to them about the Lord. You'll find they'll come to you. Because the Bible says your righteousness shall go before thee. You get that? If you'll do your homework. Now, you're going to call that one in the middle there, you're going to call that a sickness? Well, dear friends, it can be if it is, let's say, a chemical imbalance, something's gone wrong, a stroke in the head, then it's organogenic, but they need a neurosurgeon then. A neurosurgeon is what they need, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, not a Christian worker. They need a neurosurgeon. But that's less than 4%. And according to Dr. Torrey, he says, I can take a bunch of laymen in 2 weeks, teach them how to be able to discern whether it is a problem for the neurosurgeons. Just 2 weeks. That's all. Now, I believe you could take a group of people like this in 2 weeks and make you a better psychiatrist and psychologist than our colleges are turning out. What do you think of that? Why? Because you got Christ along with you, the great healer of broken hearts and the mender of the human soul. Now, I'm telling you, my dear friends, that those 3 R's are what we're talking about in the moral government of God. Now, see this car, this race car? That thing will go about 220 miles an hour on that racetrack. You know how much it'll go through that kind of ground out there? About 8. You know why? It'll be plowing out there. Yes, if it runs at all. Now that's designed to go on a certain kind of a road, isn't it? I had a man call me up, worked in our factory. He said, Mr. Conn, he said, can I come and see you? He said, I got emotional problems. I said, what's your name? He said, well, you don't know me, but my name is so-and-so. I thought, oh, yes, I do know. Because you see, I knew the men in our company. I know them in two different ends of the spectrum. You've got the very good workers, and then you got the very poor workers. And the in-between, it's true, I didn't know them. There's hundreds of those. But this fella, I knew him because he was having trouble getting to work, and had been brought to my attention. So I said, you sure can. When do you start at work? He said, I start 10 minutes after 4. I said, well, why don't you come in at 3 o'clock? So he did. He came in, and ladies, you should have seen him. He was as handsome as Hollywood movie stars are supposed to be, only they aren't. Besides, they don't like girls anyway. He came in, he sat there, and you should have seen him. Man, he had his spring wound real tight. He said, Mr. Conn, I heard you speak one Sunday morning out here in a Nazarene church. Now, I'm not Nazarene, but I love the Nazarene people, and I love the Nazarene. He said, now, all I can remember that you said was you was preaching on the first commandment. You said everything God ever commanded us to do was for our good always. I said, you got the main part of it then. Everything God ever asked us to do is for our good always. He said, Mr. Conn, I got emotional problems. Boy, did he have them. Well, now let me show you what his story was. He'd gone forward in a church in our town and specialized in cheap grace and easy believism. He went down there and so-called accepted Jesus, which I don't believe is scriptural at all. Well, he thought that was a pretty nice job that preacher had. He only had 1 hour on Sunday morning up there. So that'd be a pretty nice job, wouldn't it? So he decides he's going in the ministry, and he goes out to California to learn to be a pastor, preacher. Enrolls in theological school. While he's there with his wife and daughter, he cheats on his wife. She found out about it. She divorced him, and I don't blame her. Well, he starts hitchhiking back to Rockford, Illinois, where the both of us lived. And he goes through Phoenix, Arizona, and he goes into an upholstered sewer. Now, you know what that is. It's a nightclub. So he sits up there in a stool at the bar, and beside him is a woman. He gets to talk to her, and he picks her up. Now, wasn't that a great triumph in morals? That's what she's there for, to be picked up. Anybody could have picked her up. But he did something she never thought he'd do. He brought her all the way back to Rockford, and then he did something else she never thought he'd do. He married her. Well, she was a real high flyer. She could spend more money than he could make, and so he started signing his name on those little green pieces of paper. Then when they get to the bank, if you don't have money in there, they get touchy about it. So he had rubber checks floating all over town. So he got arrested, and he got sent up for forging checks. Now he's in the state penitentiary in Manteno, and they put him in the part for the criminally insane. Now that's a nice place for a ministerial student, right? What a shame. That young man had gone to church for bread, and he got a stone. Well, while he was there, they put him in the machine shop. Either that or he walked by the machine shop and had the window open. I don't know which. He learned a little bit about the machinist trade. Not much. When he came back to our city, he couldn't get a job, and he went to one agency after many months. And this fellow said, there's only one company in this town will have mercy upon you, but you better fly right. Now, he said, I can get you a job there. They'll have mercy, but you better fly right. He said, who is it? And he said, W.A. Whitney Corporation. So they came over, and they put him to work. I never met the fellow. Well, now here he is. He came to see me. He couldn't work at night because he's on the night shift. And 8 o'clock, he'd call up, talk to his wife. She wouldn't be there. But this time now, they got a kid or two, and she's a real go-outer, and she leaves the kids there all night by herself, and then she goes out. He said, Mr. Conn, I got emotional problems. I said, you sure have. Want me to tell you why? He said, yes. I said, right out behind our plant here is the Rock River. But wait a minute. You live out near Winnebago? I said, let's say here's a farm out there and was plowed yesterday. Last night we got 4 inches of rain. Let's say you drive my Chrysler around out there now. What would happen? He said, I'd get stuck out there in that plowed field. I said, you sure would. But wait a minute. Next summer, when the Rock River is not very deep out here, you can run across it. Let's say you start driving my Chrysler down Rock River. Now, mind you, my Chrysler is designed to go on a pavement, blacktop, macadam, good gravel road. You have almost no trouble with it. It'll pass everything but a filling station. Let's say you start driving my car down Rock River. What's going to happen? Well, he said, I'll probably hit a big rock, won't I? I said, you sure will. What'll happen then? He said, I'll break a spring. And it's going to lean toward Murphy's, isn't it? Yeah? Well, keep on going. Well, he said, I'll break another spring, won't I? Yeah, sure will. Keep on going. Well, he said, I'll get stuck, won't I? I said, yep. Keep on going. Keep on gunning it. Well, he said, I'll break a hole in the radiator when I hit these rocks, won't I? I said, yes. Now, what'll run out of the radiator? What'll happen to the temperature of the engine? He said, it'll go way up. I said, keep on gunning it. What'll happen? He said, oh, I'll burn out transmission, won't I? I said, yep. Keep on gunning it. What's going to happen? He said, oh, Mr. Conn, I'll have all kinds of trouble, won't I? I said, yep, you sure will. And that's exactly what you're doing with your life. You're driving down Rock River. You're living in all this sin. Then you wonder why. You're reaping all these consequences of it, and you're feeling it, you're experiencing it, and you're having all this trouble. I said, young man, God never designed you to live in sin. Sin is unnatural. You see that? Now that thing will really go, won't it? But not unless you run it on the kind of place and use it the way it was designed to be used. My dear friends, we were designed by our great God for the throb of holiness in our life. Not ought to be here, has to be here. We're designed for the throb of holiness, not for sin. Now turn in your Bibles and I'll show you this from the Bible. Romans 1. I want you to notice this. Romans 1. Now please look as we read from Romans 1, starting 29th verse. Romans 1:29, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding. Now what are people that are doing all of these? What's God saying? They're without understanding. Now give me another word for a person that's without understanding. Oh, ignorance one, a little stronger. I got it out there. Stupid. God is saying people who do all these sins up here are stupid. That's what God is saying. Now let's go a little further. Covenant breakers. That's people who won't keep their word. And you go out and do house-to-house work like I've done to get people to come to the house of the Lord and worship. You got to call on the average one 14 times before they come. And the last 10 times they tell you they're coming. 9 of them they don't. Look at this next one now. Without natural affection. What he's saying here, that all these sins that he has just enumerated up there are not natural to man. Now you can do them so many times they become natural, but you reap the consequences of it. You reap the consequences of it. So, now then, you see just what we were saying here. Moral government is an arrangement to regulate the conduct of moral beings by enlightening their minds as to what actions are right and proper, and by solemn pronouncements that certain consequences will follow right actions and opposite consequences wrong actions. The worthiness and the ability of the supreme governor must be recognized. It thus becomes the obligation of the supreme ruler to govern, and the subjects to submit to such wise and necessary rulership. Now, Mr. Finney, the great Charles Grandison Finney, defined moral government as follows. Moral government, when opposed to physical, is a government of mind in the opposition to government of matter. Is a government of motive or moral suasion in opposition to a government of force. Moral government is the influence of God's character as revealed in his works, providence, and word over the universe of moral being. It includes whatever influence God exerts to control the minds of moral agents in conformity with the eternal principles of righteousness. Now, look at this one. Most of us never studied this in our life. Moral obligation is the binding influence of that necessity which a moral being is under, of performing that action which is decisively proved to be the best action, or to be best fitted to the great end of all action on his part. Otherwise, the highest well-being of all, both of others and himself. Now, let me ask you a question. Man's driving down Rock River in that car, like people are doing with their lives. I ask you a simple question. What is the designer of that car doing to it? The designer. Nothing. Nothing. Not a thing. But when man goes out and gets on all of his sin and does all these things he shouldn't, and then he begins to reap the consequences, his life's falling apart, and then he says, why is God doing this to me? Let me ask you a question. What's God doing to him? Nothing. Not a thing. He's been beating his own TV set. He's driving his life down Rock River, and he's choosing the consequences, isn't he? But God is saying, well, come on, study my Bible. Come to know my Son. Come on to the cross for forgiveness and transformation. Stop living stupidly and come on, live the way I designed you to live. Don't go that way. Come on, come the way of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost. Is that right? They which do such are acceptable to God. My brother, would you dismiss us?